All right, the recording started. Good morning, all. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Municipal Accountability Review Board for the Hartford Subcommittee of the MARB. Today is January the 27th. The time is 10:04. And I'm calling this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. I'm Kimberly Kennison, and I am representing Secretary McCaw. And with me today is Christine Shaw, who is representing the Treasurer Wooden. I don't have any opening remarks, Christine.
Opening remarks, Christine.
Oh, now I have an echo. I'm going to put
I'm going
everybody
to
on
everybody on
mute. Jennifer, you're
Jennifer,
causing
you're
the echo.
Causing the echo.
Okay. Sorry, Christine, I didn't hear you. Was it?
I said good morning, all, and I
Thank
have
you.
no formal opening remarks.
Hearing myself twice overheard your comments. I apologize for that.
Sure.
Thank you. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of December the 16th. If I could have a motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Christine. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Mark. Any discussion? I hear none. Can I get a roll call vote?
Yes. Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yep.
Mr. Brockman, we're voting on the minutes.
Oh, I got to review them, so aye.
Ms. Shaw,
Aye.
Ms. Kennison,
Yes.
and are there any members that joined that I did not mention?
Hi, Julian. David Biller here, and yes.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good morning. And good morning, Matt. Thank you for joining. The next item on the agenda is the review and the discussion of the FY21 audit. This morning we have to change things a little bit. In this presentation, we won't have a formal presentation today from Clifton Larson and Allen, as there was an unexpected emergency with the presenter. So I'm going to ask Jennifer if she could just please give us a little bit of the highlights, since the information was in the materials were provided, but just the highlights. And what we'll do is look to have a deeper discussion when the auditors are able to come at our next subcommittee, as well as the mayor. Jennifer?
Good morning, Ms. Kennison. Good morning, members of the MARB. As a really quick overview of what occurred, the audit went very smoothly. It was done on time. The annual comprehensive financial report was submitted on time, so all great things. We had no findings. There was only one management comment, which was around grants through the Board of Ed that Leslie will go through, but nothing significant, and there were no material audit adjustments.
Perfect. Thank you. I did see that Leanne is with us as well. Does she have any additional or?
Good morning, everyone. No additional comments. Jen had a great summary. It ended up being a very good year on the city side. It was the first year that we got the audit done by the beginning of December, which was
that's great.
A first in my 16 years here at the city. But overall, just to let the committee know, the federal single audit has not been completed yet. It has a due date of March 15th. And we are on track to meet that due date. There was just some last minute changes that CLA couldn't get to in time in order to file it by December 31st, but we will meet the March 15th deadline.
Thank you for that update. Great news on accomplishing it earlier. I know that you'd always, it would always end up, right towards the end of the year. And then you did have that 1 year with a little hiccup. So that's great for the team. It means that you got to hang on to those, and it's running smoothly.
Absolutely.
Congratulations.
Thank
We'll
you.
look forward to next month and hearing the details from CLA. The
I
next
just want to
item.
add my congratulations to the team. That is quite impressive. As brief as the summary, it belies the all the work that actually goes into coming out with a clean opinion. So, congrats to the Hartford team.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree entirely. All right, the next item on the agenda is the review, the discussion, and the possible action of the 3 labor contracts. The first labor contract is the Federal Federation of School and Special Police Officers. This contract covers about 100 Board of Ed employees. The contract expired on June 30th of 2017. We have a tentative agreement from a successor contract with a termination that terminated on July of 2017, and this tentative agreement is through June 30th of 2024. It was signed and approved by both the union and the Board of Education, and the MARB has the authority today to either approve, reject, or take no action on this agreement. If the MARB chooses to take action, we have until February the 3rd to do so. So since the deadline of this MARB action, it falls before the next full MARB meeting, our plans are to have a special meeting immediately following this meeting, should the board choose to take action and move it forward with a recommendation to the MARB today. And the city has provided us the tentative agreement supporting documents, and in addition, some supplementary information that was provided for the committee members was distributed. Some of it was yesterday evening. The superintendent or the CFO can provide us with some update, and I do see that their legal counsel is with us as well today.
Yeah, good morning. This is Melinda Kaufman. I'm the legal counsel for the Board of Ed. And if you would allow me, I can do a brief introduction and then we can answer any questions you might have. Let me briefly introduce who we have here. Obviously, I know you know Superintendent Torres Rodriguez. We also have Chief Financial Officer Philip Penn here, the Chief Talent Officer Tiffany Curtis, and the Senior Executive Director of Human Resources, Natasha Banks. We have the union president, Davy Velez, as well as the union representative, Elizabeth Guerra. And I think I also saw Grace Figueroa join, who is the vice president of the union. So with that, very briefly, as Kimberly has already said, this is a contract that expired back on June 30th, 2017. We have been in negotiations for a fairly long time and have reached agreement that my understanding is was unanimously agreed to by the union when they ratified it, as well as by the Board of Ed. It has been ratified. So let me go over briefly what is included in this. And I also want to note that during the 16-17 school year, this union did take a hard 0, so no GWIs, no step movement. So that was the year before this contract goes in effect. This contract is retroactive to 17-18. You will see 4 years of 0 GWI, no step through 2021. 21-22 is again a 0 GWI, but we did need to do a correction on the steps because this unit was such lower paid compared to the similar units in the DERG that we had reached the point where they were not even hiring people on step 1 because they were having issues hiring people on that step. So we did a course correction by eliminating step 1 and adding a new step 4, and all employees would be moving 1 step this year. And then in 22-23, it would be a 2% GWI no step, and 23-24, a 2% GWI no step. And you have supporting documents that do show the cost outs of all of those. So in effect, the average over the 7 years of increases would be a 1.78% increase, which is much less than what we've seen from other MIRA units over those years, which have always been the average being more than 2% overall for those years. As far as health insurance, since we're mid-year this year, would be making no changes this year, but starting next year, all of the employees in this unit would be moving to the high deductible health plan with a health savings account. Their cost share would remain the same as it currently is on their PPO. This is our only unit that all of the members were in a PPO with no high deductible health plan options. So this is a big change for this unit. And their cost share for the next year would be 12%, and then the year after would be 12.5%. And other than that, it's the standard high deductible health plan you've seen in the past. One thing we did do for the first year, the board is proposing to fund 75% of the HSA deductible amount for this group and front loading half of that 75% at the beginning in order to help if there are employees that end up with some sort of high cost health issue at the beginning of the year. That will help them be able to fund that as they ease into this plan. And again, we've showed you on another form the estimated cost savings that came from our health insurance consultant. Other minor changes were some language correction. One of the things we did do was remove the ability of laid off employees and their dependents and survivors to continue on the health insurance after they are no longer employed. And then we did some course corrections to address the Janus decision as far as union dues, fixed the personal leave of absence to reflect anti-discrimination laws just by changing the language, and did some global replacements as far as the correct titles of people. So that is a very brief overview. And at this point, if you have questions, either myself, Chief Penn, or Dr. Curtis could hopefully answer them.
Sorry, I didn't realize I put myself on mute. I'd like to start with the members if you have any questions.
Under health benefit, health insurance, just to clarify.
Yes, Mark.
First of all, the information that we received from Julian yesterday about a fully insured product is inaccurate because you're self-insured, aren't you?
Yes.
You charge a self-insured for a self-insured product, but you're self-insured, right?
Correct.
So basically those numbers are inaccurate.
Yes and no. What those numbers show, and that was something I should have explained better when I went over this. Up until this point, we have used the fully insured equivalent rate from Anthem in order to establish the employee's cost share. What we are now doing, because we've realized that that is out of whack with the actual numbers that we've seen over years of trend for the actual charges, we are in this contract changing that to be the allocation rate plus a maximum of 4%, which we are hoping will better accurately reflect what the board's costs actually are. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, one was a budgetary figure, the other one, so basically, yeah, I get it. It's a budgetary figure. It's just concerning because what you have is you have a figure that's not reflective of the actual claims experience. You have a figure that in my mind is typical of what other contracts do, which uses a inflated figure for self-insured to cover other costs within a budget, but that's for another discussion. Also, the issue of the allocation rate. Now, the term allocation rate is unique to Anthem, correct? In other words, the term allocation rate, maybe somebody could explain specifically for the members of the board what the term allocation rate means. It's an Anthem term It's not used in the industry. The term used in the industry is base rate. But just for clarification and for the record, could somebody explain to the members what the term allocation rate means, please?
Chief Penn, either I can answer that, or if you'd like to jump in here.
No, go ahead, Melinda, and then I'll chime in if needed.
Yeah, and the allocation rate that we have referenced in this contract is specifically Anthem's allocation rate. So it is a number that they set, which I believe, and I am not an insurance consultant here, so I will do the best I can to explain, but it is a number that they do set as to what their estimate of the costs will be for the year. And then we have done allocation rate plus a maximum of 4%. With the, obviously, since we are self-insured, there is risk, and that 4% is set at to hopefully absorb that risk, and does give us the ability, if there is a good year, to be able to drop that to a lower number and get some money back to the membership.
Yeah, allocation rate means it's a self-insured rate, correct? In other words, in the industry, an allocation, well, I shouldn't say allocated, but it reflects self-insured. And I guess my concern is the language in the contract, for clarity purposes, or maybe these minutes can be referenced for clarity, is Hartford is charging a self-insured rate rather than a fully insured rate as your rate for the 12% and 12.5% premium share. Because previously you were charging a fully insured rate.
Correct.
So now we're going, and what you're putting in your contract is specifically the fact that you are charging a percentage off a self-insured rate, even though it's not specifically say self-insured. The term allocation infers self-insured. It's an insured product at a self-insured rate, and the member is being charged 12% plus 12% of the rate plus 4% of what in the industry they call I call it the gap, but as you suggested, it's a buffer between the actual claims versus premiums. So it's just, when I say unclear, being somewhat of a student of contract language, I get concerned about the language that everybody understands, but when you come into a contract and you look at it, it really, somebody says, for example, it says, I'll read the language specifically. It says something to the effect of members shall contribute the following percentages toward the annual premium or the Anthem rate plus not more than 4% for the individual. Well, if you look at that, it's like an or what? I mean, it's A and B. I get what you're saying, I think. It's just for my purposes, it's a little messy, but if everybody understands what the intent is, I guess so be it. Both sides have agreed to it, and I'm not here to meddle into a collective bargaining agreement. So it's just concerning. Also, again, the union has agreed to it, but what you're doing, it's 12.5%, but the members actually are paying the first year $500. Let's see, you're paying 75%, so their member is paying $500, and then after that, the member is paying 50% of a family plan. They're paying $2,000 plus 12% of the premium. And for some individuals, that could be 10% of their salary. It's just, they've agreed to it, and I'm not here to meddle in it. It's just concerning. Also, you have 37 waivers. Is that correct? Is it 37 that I read?
Pulling that up right now.
Waivers of insurance, that is.
Yeah. $39.
So roughly 40% of the unit waives the insurance, which I guess, does this contract, or maybe I'm getting my contracts confused, allow or call for the board to, if they waive, they get $1,000? Did I read that in here, or is that someplace else in another
No.
contract?
This contract does have, I cannot tell you off the top of my head that it's 1,000. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Thank you.
But there is a payment in lieu of, if there's
Yeah.
a waiver, there is a payment.
I think it's 1,000.
I believe you're correct. I just don't want to state that affirmatively. Yep, it is 1,000. It's
Yeah.
on page
Okay.
24.
And the last question, yeah, it's 4 vacancies right now in the unit, according to your documents. Do you budget for those vacancies? I think the last time we spoke, you said yes.
Yes,
But
we do.
Okay. Okay, I just, again, it's been as was stated, 5 years is a long time for a contract to be in limbo, but nonetheless, in examining the salaries, and the union did agree along with management, it appears in my mind to be reflective of similar units, and they do have a turnover rate that's concerning, but that's for management to deal with. And I have no objection to the contract moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. I see that Matt has his hand up.
Yeah, on the same, thank you, on the same or similar line of questioning as where Mark
Yes.
was going.
Yes.
I know there's some language in this contract about the board having the rights to study additional health insurance plans. Obviously, this group has been concerned about health insurance costs and trying to look at the state partnership plan and see if that makes more sense for the Board of Education and the employees long term. Can you speak to sort of, let's say we come up with, once this sort of consultant process goes through on our end, the understanding that the partnership plan is a better plan or a cheaper plan, or if there's a different option out there, I don't know, whatever that is, what that would look like in terms of implementation?
Sure, and let me just find the exact language, but essentially we do have language in here on the timeframes, and I'm just talking generally, but there is a time frame when the board has to advise the union if it were interested in changing to what they believed was a comparable plan, and the union has a certain amount of time to say they're going to challenge that, and then it requires going to arbitration. Obviously, if everybody agrees, then we can certainly do an amendment to a contract as far as insurance, if that were where people wanted to go in the future.
So you're not looking at this as language that would prohibit or impede the ability of the board and the union to change health insurance plans should we come up with a determination that the partnership plan or whatever other plan is a better plan at a more reasonable cost, that sort of thing.
If all parties were to agree, there would not be any, I'll use your words, impediment in the contract. The contract language addresses if the parties don't agree.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? I do like the fact that the Board of Education is actually assisting with the changeover in the 75% with that first year of the high deductible. So I think that is helpful for those members that are participating in this plan. So that gives them at least a good start, right? I do hope that there is education when you're moving into this type of insurance for those members so that this way they can understand, you know, that this is a different type of modeling where you have to, you know, meet your costs up front, right? And make sure that you have that bridge of those deductibles, correct?
Yes, and frankly, we have a lot of time to do that, which is nice. If this is passed tonight, it gives us almost 6 months or 5 months to be able to do that education campaign. And we did this with our custodians after we approved that contract, and a lot of meetings, a lot of sitting down even, and helping individuals sign up for what they needed to do. So we would anticipate a similar approach this time as well.
Good. That would be great. Because not everybody's educated in this. And I can tell you it can be challenging. Any other questions? I don't see any. Shall I ask for a motion to approve the Federation of the School Special Police tentative agreement for recognition to the MARB?
I move to approve.
Thank you, Mark.
I'll second it. Matthew.
Thank you, Matt. Any other discussion? Julian, were you going to say something or no? You're just waiting for me.
I was only going to start naming names.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have something before I moved on to the next step. Okay. I see. I hear no other discussion. We'll move on to the roll call vote.
Mr. Brockman,
Aye.
Mr. Biller,
Yes, aye.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
Ms. Kennison,
Yes.
and that's everybody.
Thank you all. The motion has carried and approved. And, you know, thank you, Board of Ed, for addressing this and getting a tentative agreement and getting that through. I see that those members have been waiting for some time, so this is great that the negotiation has met to an agreement. So kudos for everybody on that. We'll move on
Thank
to
you.
the next. You're welcome. We'll move on to the next labor contract, which is the Hartford Federation of the Teachers. And sorry, Phil, I need you to mute until I'm finished. I got to echo. Thank you. So this contract covers 1,600 Board of Ed employees. The current contract expires on June 30th of 22. The tentative agreement has been reached on a successor contract with the term from July 1st, 22 through June 30th of 2025. The tentative agreement has been approved by both the union and the Board of Education. The MARB has an opportunity to either approve, reject, or take no action again on this contract. If the MARB chooses to take action, we have until March the 3rd to do so. If the subcommittee recommends approval, the full MARB would consider this contract at our regular meeting on February the 10th. It is not included in the special meeting to follow this meeting. And I will then turn it over to the Board of Education, CFO or legal to present this contract and give us some background.
Very good. Thank you. Let me give you a little bit more background, and I appreciate that introduction. As was noted, we have about 1,600 staff members, so this is by far our largest collective bargaining unit. As was mentioned, the union ratified this back on January 12th. The board then followed up and ratified it on January 18th. Just to go through sort of the major changes in the contract, it's a 0.35, so it's 0.0035% GWI with step advancement, and with people on top step getting 1.75%, in 22-23. No GWI, step advancement, 1.75 to top step, 23-24. And then in 24-25, no GWI, step advancement, and then all the members on top step again receive 1.75%. We provided a breakdown in the summary document of what the cost impact is per year. The total impact over the 3 years is about $12 million. This is, as I mentioned, by far and away our largest bargaining unit. The total increase is 9.79%, compounded that's 10.11, and the average is 3.26 over the life of the agreement. As was mentioned, this group was already on the high deductible health plan with an HSA, and they're going to stay on that for the duration of the contract. Similar to what was done with the school security officers you just heard about, we're now going to be basing the premium cost share based on the Anthem allocation rate plus a margin not to exceed 4%. Employee cost shares are 19% in the current contract. Effective July 1, 2022, that will stay the same. Effective July 1, 2023, it'll increase to 19.5, and July 1st of 2024, it'll increase to 20.0. There are a couple of other changes in the contract, some of which are based on our ability to attract and retain talent going forward. For instance, we're increasing the tuition reimbursement to $675 per credit from a current level of $300 per credit. We're increasing our summer school and our extra duty, extra pay rates to $40 per hour, which makes us more competitive with other districts and also increases participation in those critical programs throughout the school year for us. We've increased the number of maximum number of accumulated sick days to 187 from 175. That's equivalent to 1 year for this bargaining unit, which is consistent with what we've seen elsewhere. And then we've had a couple of other things that we've changed that are fairly minor. As for instance, we're now allowing that if there are members of the National Guard or reserves, if they get called up during the school year, they can receive the differential between their military pay and their full teacher pay for up to 10 days per year. This was a process that went to mediation, but I'm told this is the first time in a very long while that the teachers did not go to arbitration. So this was a collaborative process, I would say, between the union side and the management side. And we were happy to bring it to an agreement that we can bring before you today for consideration.
Thank you, Phil, for your great overview on this. And I believe OPM had a representative that participated in that mediation, if I'm correct. Phil, is this the one? Julian?
I don't believe that we did.
Okay. All right. It must have been a different conference. Melinda? Okay.
Yeah,
So you pop in.
that was actually the security officers that was mediated. I forgot to mention that.
Thank you. And so when he said it didn't go to arbitration, I thought that I clicked that it was this one and I had forgotten which one it was. So I apologize, but okay. Thank you. Well, that is good news that it did not go to arbitration this year. So congratulations to all parties on that. I don't have any initial questions. Does anybody else from the MARB members?
The only thing I have is requested information relative to turnover and vacancy rates. I have yet to see it. My concern is being a product of Hartford in and out of the school system as a teacher and as a student. I've historically seen, it's more of commentary than anything else, I guess. I understand the board's attempt to put language in to attract and retain teachers, but in urban centers like Hartford, which has been publicly out there as having considerable number of vacancies year after year. I've seen the salaries in comparison to the other areas around Hartford. And I'm going back to when people weren't around in the 80s and then 90s under the Education Enhancement Act, where Hartford was built up to be in the top 3 or 4 to attract and retain, and now they're middle of the pack, if not at the bottom, in certain lanes. Again, not questioning the collective bargaining process or the wisdom of both parties to settle. My concern is I'm not seeing, and this is for the board to contemplate certainly more than anybody, anything in here that would hopefully change the trajectory of vacancies and or retention of teachers. The salaries are commensurate. Your percentages certainly are commensurate. I just have concerns that an urban contract in today's setting, being middle of the pack, will continue to cause less than ideal teaching and learning conditions because of the vacancies and or attrition that may occur on a yearly basis. Obviously, this is not for a point of discussion. It's just a comment on mine that though I'll vote in favor of this, and I understand its total being consistent with other bargaining units that have settled, other bargaining units don't have the uniqueness that Hartford or any other urban center has. So in addition to you looking at, as you stated, the paying for graduation or graduate school credits, I would encourage, and I'm sure the superintendent has a concern as well as everybody, continued discussion, dialogue, and or thought process of how people can work together to make the contract more enticing to attract and retain teachers in your center in Hartford, because it's a concern. I'm not sure this contract addresses that concern, but it's a fair contract relative to the percentages and what's around it. But at times we have to be unequal to be equal. So that said, it's just a commentary, but certainly not a criticism of the contract itself, and I look forward to voting for it.
Thank you, Mark. Matt? Mr. Brockman?
Just 2 questions. I presume that the conversation that we had on the previous contract regarding the fully insured rates versus these allocated rates, that I noticed in the summary that we're switching to this allocated rates for the teachers as well. So I just want to make sure that that is it's the same
Situation
as the other bargaining unit.
That is correct. And to preview when we get to the next one, that's the same thing too.
Okay. And then
Thank you.
I've got my same question that I asked on the other one in terms of the should the MARB sort of get to a place where the partnership plan turns out to be the more reasonable place, can you sort of walk through what does that look like in terms of transitioning the employees over, kind of thing?
Now, there's very similar language in this contract too, that it has to be a negotiated process. We can't arbitrarily make the decision on our end. Okay. And just to clarify and to add some additional color to this, I was on the phone with our benefits consultant yesterday, talking about the fact that we're approaching the renewal period with Anthem, and discussing the fact that I wanted a comparison to the Partnership 2.0, just to see where we are in comparison to those rates as well. I guess the key point to take away here, and Mr. Waxenberg hit on it, was that we were using the wrong rates for a long time before I got here, in terms of what the previous cost share that was imposed on employees. We're addressing it in these 3 contracts that we have before you today, and our intent is to address it in the future ones going forward. Whether or not we do it through a full-blown CBA, collective bargaining process, or we do an MOU, my intent is to try to have that all in place by July 1st if we can.
Thank you. Phil, do you have another question, Matt?
No,
Your
I'm
hand
good.
is still up. Okay.
Sorry, take it down.
Nope, you're fine. I just wanted to make sure. Your comment about Anthem's contract, I apologize. When does that end?
It's a fiscal contract. So
Okay,
it's July 1st to June 30th.
okay. Thank you. As well as thank you for looking into those rates as Mark has brought to the attention of the board and really getting underneath that and starting to make some adjustments. That would be helpful. Any other questions? Okay, I hear none. Then I am wondering if we are prepared to take a motion on the Hartford Federation of the Teachers in consideration that will move up for the full MARB board milling. A motion for approval.
So moved.
I'll second it to the same.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Matt, I'll put you as the second. And Mark, you're moving the motion. Any additional discussion? I hear none. Okay, Julian, it is over to you for the roll call vote, please.
Mr. Brockman,
Aye.
Mr. Biller,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
and Ms. Kennison.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you
That's it
all.
for me.
Great news. We have the motion has carried. The next item on the agenda is to discuss the third contract that we have today, which is the Hartford Principals and Supervisors Association. And in front of you today is this contract covers 125 Board of Education employees. The current contract expires on June 30th of 22. The tentative agreement has been reached on a successor contract with a term of July 1st, 22 through June 30th of 2025. The tentative agreement has been approved by both the union and the Board of Education. The MARB has the authority to approve, reject, or take no action on this agreement. If the MARB chooses to take action, it has until March the 3rd to do so. If the subcommittee recommends approval to the full MARB, would consider this contract at our regular meeting on February the 10th. And I am turning it over to the Board of Education chief or legal to provide additional commentary on the contract.
Thank you very much. It's me again.
Thank you.
So let me take you through sort of the basics on the contract.
Perfect.
As mentioned, nowhere near as big a unit as the teachers, with about 125 people in it. The prior contract, and I think this is important just for context, that ran from 2019 to 2022, expiring this June. In the first 2 years of that contract, the union took hard zeros for both of those years. So that kind of factored into our negotiation process. So in terms of what lies ahead for salary changes for 22-23, it's a 1.5% GWI, and all members not at maximum receive a range adjustment. And I'll discuss what range means in a second. And then it's the same terms through the 23-24 and 24-25, 1.5% GWI in both of those years, and all members not on maximum at maximum receive a range adjustment. So the way the range adjustment works is it's 27.7% of the difference between the minimum and maximum within that group. And a group is similarly placed employees with roughly the same responsibilities, things of that nature. So it would effectively take about 4 years from a bargaining unit member to move from the minimum to the maximum, provided that there was going to be range movement in each of those years per the CBA. So what that translates into is a total increase over the life of the contract of just over 1.2, almost 1.3 million. 7.46%. The compounded rate is 7.65, so it averages out to just 2.49%. This group, again, was already on the high deductible health plan with an HSA. They're going to remain on that for the duration of the contract. Premium cost share, as mentioned a few seconds ago, will now be based on that Anthem allocated rate, plus a margin not to exceed 4%. Employee cost shares are 19% in the current contract. Starting July 1st, they'll move to 19.5%, then 20 on July 1st, 2023, and 20.5 on July 1st, 2024. The other changes that were in the contract were mostly fairly minor. We're increasing the 403B contribution for non-principals to $1,000 from what was $500 per year, and changing vesting to 5 years instead of 7. We found some administrative burden that was in the contract where we required people to prove every single year that they had a doctorate degree, and just recognizing that didn't make any sense. If you have a doctorate, clearly you continue to have a doctorate. So now they're only going to have to do that once. And then the salary protection for a displaced administrator is now reduced to 1 year. And under the expiring agreement, the salary protection was in place for 2 years. And at that point, I think that's all the major changes. This contract was mostly focused on wages and insurance, and I think the summary sort of reflects that.
Very good. Thank you, Phil, for the overview. Any questions? Mark, I see you lighting up.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's consistent with the previous ones, and I've already made my comments, so it's fine.
Thank you very much. Matt is on silent. He has none. All right. No other questions from the board members on this contract? Very good. Can I get a motion to approve the Hartford Principals and Supervisors Association contract as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mark. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Christine. Any other discussion? I hear none. I'm going to move to Julian to please take a roll call vote.
All right, Mr. Brockman,
He's on mute. Maybe we come back to
we'll
him.
come back to Matt. Mr. Biller,
I apologize. Yes.
okay. Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
Ms. Kennison,
Yes.
and is Mr. Brockman, are you back? All right, well, that's 5 votes in favor, and
Yes.
if we can, we'll get Matt's vote for the record later.
Thank you. He might have technical difficulties, but that'll be perfect. We do have a quorum, so this does, we still have a quorum, so this motion carries and is approved. All right. Thank you all. The next item on the agenda is special education and data that has been provided from the Board of Education, and asking if you have an opportunity today to either do a touch point. We do have a half an hour. If you would like to go deeper into your presentation today, we can do so. So I will kick it over to the Board of Education. Well, actually, I just got a little bit more commentary. The information is distributed in the packet today, and so if you do have enough time, then I'll leave it to the board to decide how much time they would need. If not, we would then take up for additional consideration at the next sub. Mr. Penn, or good morning, Superintendent.
Good morning. I can certainly begin the presentation. We can certainly try to get through it in the 30 minutes. And, you know, you got the presentation, so there's a lot of information there as we try to address all of the data requests. So if Chief Penn, maybe you and I can go team on this, maybe you can project and I can speak to the data.
Are you able to see what I'm sharing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you blow it up a
Excellent.
little bit?
Sure thing.
Thank you. People like me with bad eyes.
I can appreciate that. Me too. All right.
Wonderful. So we can just go to the next slide, which actually is an executive summary. And so I'm just going to skip that as well and dive deeper into the additional context. Quick level setting here, some definitions, right? When we talk about students, Hartford Public Schools and non-magnets and choice, want to make sure that we understand that when I speak about the choice system, it ultimately includes like the larger umbrella, right? Students in magnets that are operated by us in Hartford or other operators, open choice, and charter schools. So let's jump in, Chief Penn, in the next slide. So overall, right, as an urban center, we do have a higher needs student profile than other Connecticut districts, as well as similarly sized national peers, and comparable to other large urban districts. And that includes a higher proportion of students with special needs. I'll unpack some of this in the slides ahead. Our special education population has increased slightly as a portion of total enrollment for the last 5 years. So this is actually consistent with Connecticut trends more generally and is exacerbated by Hartford's overall enrollment loss pattern over the 5 years. As the overall enrollment has dropped, the proportion of students that remain in the system that have special education needs has risen. And we suspect that as a result of right, the ongoing pandemic, we might see the number of students that are requiring special education needs. We think that's going to increase, or the level of service required to meet their needs will increase. And you know, there's been several articles published that actually are projecting this to be the case across the state. The pattern of student needs in terms of disability types is comparable to the profile of students with disabilities in Connecticut as a whole. This is data that we have shared previously with you all, just to kind of give you a glimpse of across the entire continuum of disability types. Compared to national peer districts, Hartford has a higher proportion of students diagnosed with autism and other health impairments, OHI. Under the OHI umbrella, for example, is where ADHD, for example, falls. As you will see later on, those disabilities also make up a higher proportion of students placed in our out-of-district settings, which is also a focus of this data inquiry. So when we're talking about the entire special education umbrella, if you will, in Hartford, it can be broken down into 3 main categories. First, we have special education non-Hartford Public School choice system. So these are tuition costs that we pay for Hartford students that are attending non-Hartford Public School magnets, or costs for students enrolled in open choice district that require those services. This also includes students in open choice districts that are subsequently placed in what we call out of district settings, whether they're private or another or a public setting. And this also includes charter and other Hartford Public Schools, for example, like Jamoki. We've had conversations about Jamoki before here. We have a limited influence over these services provided to students in those settings, or the costs that are required to serve them. However, as you all know, we are responsible for 100% of those costs, and for fiscal year 21, we looked at $31 million there in the dark green. Another category is Hartford Public Schools outplacement. So this includes all of Hartford students that we serve in our schools, or in non-Hartford Public School magnet schools. So those are students that are outplaced, and non-Hartford Public School magnet students from Hartford are included here because we are involved in the decision-making process for those students' placement, right? So we're talking about our students that we outplace, and students in magnets that are operated by others. And so for fiscal year 21, that was a $42 million total cost. And the third category are our in-district special education. This category of spend is the cost of serving students with special needs in Hartford, and it includes the entire continuum. Our teachers, para-educators, psychologists, social workers, and other related services, transportation, all to serve our students with special education, and the total cost there is $62 million. So this is kind of like your bigger picture. And I know that today the focus is going to be on spending for students in non-Hartford Public School settings, but I just wanted to note that compared to other districts, Hartford spends less than comparable peers on students with special education needs in the district. This is true even though we have slightly higher identification rates than other systems. And these numbers, both for us in Hartford or for other peer systems, does not include students in outplacement settings or the dollars spent to serve them. It is possible that some of these systems are serving more students in district and therefore spending more on them than we are. But it also can indicate that as far as relative spend on special education services, Hartford is not overspending relative to peers on students that we're serving in-house. So regarding the historical out-of-district students with special need costs, there are, I guess, two key takeaways from the numbers that you see here. First, let's go to the left in the dark green, you'll see that Hartford Public Schools outplacement costs over the last 5 years, and the costs and the enrollment, right, has been constant. And you see the decrease over the last 5 years, while it does still make up 60% of all of the out-of-district tuition spend. And then we'll unpack the reasons why. And the second point here is that, and that's in the lighter green, the historical cost for students served in non-Hartford Public School magnets and in open choice, right? So you can see that the number of special ed students served has grown rapidly. Like we're talking about 35% for magnet, 29% increase for open choice, 44% for open choice students placed in outplacement settings. And the cost has grown even more rapidly over the same 5-year period, right? At a 57.5 growth since FY18. And the last important consideration here is that those growth trends are expected to continue as more students are enrolled in magnet and choice programs, right? The most recent proposal, chef proposal, which goes to the judge today, and there's a hearing later this afternoon. We can expect to see the growth in magnets and the increase So that means overall, a higher percentage of Hartford dollars spent on tuition will rise, and the out-of-district costs as well. In our next slide, so just to, again, in terms of some enrollment patterns, we can see how the two contributing factors are impacting the financial burden for Hartford Public Schools, right? Factor one, overall enrollment in non-Hartford Public School magnets is increasing, right? 18% since fiscal year 18. Factor two, the enrollment of students with special needs increasing at rates higher than the overall enrollment growth. I mean, I know there's a lot in this slide, so I just wanted to kind of, one, respond to the data requests. And by the way, just as a point of housekeeping, every slide has, in the top left there, which data requests you all made and the corresponding data set. And, just to make sure that, we talk about when I share this data, right, we have an obligation, as we all know, to serve students and serve students well. And so, I use the word burden, but want to make sure that we're talking about the financial obligation that lies with Hartford. In the next slide, there were data requests with regard to outplacement. So the outplacement numbers have been slowly reducing over the last 4 years and currently make up about 10% of all students with disability students in Hartford. We do expect that that number to increase, both because we're only, quite frankly, halfway through the year and still identifying needs. And like I mentioned before, right, due to COVID, we anticipate, and that, quite frankly, are seeing that already, more and greater needs that are demanding more, intensive interventions than in previous years. The majority of students at Hartford Public School that Hartford Public Schools places in out-of-district settings are for OHI. I referenced, other health impairment before, ADD, ADHD, emotional disturbance, and autism diagnosis. This is greater than the overall proportion of Hartford Public Schools special education students who have those diagnoses, which, we saw earlier is also higher than national trends, at least for both autism and OHI. The majority of outplacements are for students in high school. So by 12th grade, right, which this includes students who are overage and undercredited, right, we see 40% of all students with disabilities are served in out-of-district placement for 12th grade. For the students that are in outplaced, right, outplaced by grades. In the next slide here, we continue to build our in-house programs. We've done this over several years now to reduce that reliance on outplacement services and to serve some of our more intense needs students in district. You can see here since 2017, we have served around 300 students in 3 specialized programs. These are specifically targeting the student populations that Hartford most typically outplaces: high school students and students with autism, emotional disturbances, and under the OHI disabilities, ADD, ADHD. We continue to build those programs. This is another view. The programs cost us roughly $16.6 million a year to run, including teachers, paraeducators, transportation, right? So had the district otherwise placed these students in out-of-district settings, it will cost us about $50 million in outplacement tuition based on the tuition rates that are typically, that we typically pay for students in those need profiles. So by implementing these programs in-house, right, we are preventing upwards of 34 million in additional spending on outplacement. So, right, the 40 million could look like 74 million if we didn't have these programs in-house. We had talked at one point about tiers and tiers of support for students, both academically and social, in terms of social, emotional wellness and behavioral needs. And so just wanted to give everyone a glance as to some of the investments and the services with stimulus funds in new added supports for our higher need students. This is particularly students that present higher need behavioral challenges, right? We know that the research is clear that serving and preventing higher cost behavior challenges requires supports on both ends of the spectrum, right? Including general education supports. I know Mr. Waxenberg has referenced this before, and also interventions, right? This includes providing support for our teachers and professional learning for teachers around those additional supports that could be provided in the general education environment. And it also includes specific counseling and mental health supports for students who have been identified as needing additional supports. And so we did target some of the ESSER and ARP funding for that. In terms of looking ahead, and I know that we are struggling like many other districts with staffing, but looking ahead, we are also looking to scale some of these programs to serve more students and potentially offset some of the existing outplacement tuition costs, right, to size some of the potential impact on conservatively, right? If we assume that 80% of the additional students we're able to serve would have otherwise been placed in outplacement, right? Meaning that 20% of students in these specialized programs wouldn't have otherwise required those outplacement services, then, we could reduce outplacement spending by as much as 10 million a year. If all those students would have required, right, the outplacement, then those savings would be even higher. But, successfully scaling these programs, as you might imagine, requires many factors in place that are currently at risk. The most prevalent one for us, right, is staffing. We can now go to the next slide and just go a little deeper into some of these risks, right? So we know that we have to think about construction facility timelines that could impact our expansion plans. There's a school currently that's in construction that is specifically has specific areas in the construction plan for these programs. But we also have other challenges that we face in executing our plan. We need highly skilled and highly specialized educators for these programs. And right now, the staffing shortages is impacting us across the board, from classroom teachers to special ed teachers to para educators, and especially, when we think about specialized program staff, speech and language therapists, for example. So this means that not only are we at risk of not implementing and expanding the programs, but we're also, the system is also at risk in terms of interventions that prevent those more intensive support needs happening. And we're also still trying to really understand trauma, unpack the trauma and the impact that students are facing now that, right, we've all been back full time And we do. We expect that those needs will increase, quite frankly, before they decrease, based on what we're experiencing so far. And also, we do have our strategic plan that has very ambitious goals around improving those foundational supports, general education foundational supports that kind of bolsters, the entire experience. These are things that down the road that should lower the overall identification and prevent many of the higher cost services and interventions. But as some of you might know, this takes time and definitely staffing to execute. So in the meantime, right, we have to we're trying to tackle both what we call that tier one, that foundation, and the supports, those more intensive supports for students. So what is shown here, right, in the slide is some vacancies to start the year. And we've had trouble filling these positions even this far into the year. We are putting a significant portion of our stimulus dollars behind mitigating some of these challenges, right? This includes direct investments in curriculum and coaching support for our staff, in resource teachers, for example, and also including our talent systems to recruit, retain great talent. We're looking at about $40 million over the next 3 years, and that represents about 28% of our ESSER spending. And while it is an exciting opportunity to invest deeply in our strategies for supporting student needs, we know that it takes time and capacity to implement, and then obviously to see the impact. I would be remiss if I didn't also highlight that there are other fiscal sustainability threats to us as a system, right? Including, which we've talked about before, continued patterns of enrollment decline and increased, payment, right? We just saw in these slides to outside systems to educate our students, which is a big part of our special education story, right? The entire backdrop, and the investments that we need to make in our strategic plan to support students require substantial trade-offs in order to sustain them moving forward. So this is work that we're engaging in over the next several months with other stakeholders, and we'll be sure to come back and share that progress with you all. But while we are looking at special education internally and externally, know that that's part of a larger financial sustainability challenge that we have. In the next slide, in addition to some of those challenges that I just spoke about, right? Increasing tuition payments, the enrollment. I want to just highlight two other major challenges, right, to our financial sustainability around special education costs. One is just the insufficient special education revenue, right? The challenge of our special education funding, right, in the state. Many of us know that here on this call, right? We know that there's less spending in Connecticut than other state education agencies supporting special education, and that can be exacerbated by not fully funding ECF, the excess cost grant that is intended to support districts in, especially, when we're serving higher need students. So last year, for example, Hartford spent $135 million on special education services, and this is for both our in-district and non-Hartford Public School magnets, choice, and students in those outplacement settings. And we received in federal and state revenue, 62 million in dedicated special education revenue. So you're right, that left about 73 million, or 54% of special education costs. Most, and that must be supported through, right, local revenue sources. So this effectively takes money, away from other students in Hartford Public Schools in order to cover those costs, as, right, a district that already, serves high proportion of students with higher level of needs, the majority Black and Latino, right? So, we have to think about it also more broadly, right? That, from a statewide perspective, it poses a significant inequity, right? Districts like Hartford, right? We don't necessarily have access to the same property tax base as as other districts do. So in order to raise that revenue, as you all know, right, the city would have to increase tax rates, and that gets into some other, unique burdens on low-income families. I don't want to go into all of that, but I just wanted to kind of highlight that this is part of a larger challenge. And the other point here is another major threat is, right, the impact, unintended as it may, of open choice. Our students in open choice are counted at, half a traditional student unenrollment counts. That, essentially what it means is that for every student that enrolls in open choice, we also, experience a decline in enrollment and revenue for students. So about 50%, Chief Penn, am I correct about the ECS amount?
That's right. It is 50%.
And so, we don't have a dedicated resource available to actively be involved in special education decisions. We've also had that conversation here before. We do participate in magnet, the PPT meetings, the planning and placement team meetings. We don't have staffing, the human capital to do that. And so it's not being there, right? We don't have a voice. And even if we were there, I also want to make sure that, I clarify that it is a team-based decision. And so nonetheless, right, we still have to, we are responsible for 100% of the special education costs. And then just to give you a glance here, in the last 5 years, per pupil costs for special education for students in open choice have exceeded per pupil costs for students in magnet programs by $4,000 to $8,000 per student. This excludes, by the way, the students in outplacements, right? At the same time, the percent of Hartford students in open choice settings requiring special education services has increased. So that adds, right, to the financial, right, the cost, special education costs that we have to pay out for. Okay, we can stop here, Chief Penn. I know that there have been conversations or questions about legislatively, and I think there was one of the questions talk about, I think question was what legislative recommendations would we have? These are things that we've talked about before and that some of you on this call have referenced as well. Right, the increasing sharing of special education funding, fully funding excess cost grant. I know that is easier said than done. We don't have the staffing, the resources to have representation at PPT meetings in open choice settings. That could be another recommendation. So I can stop here. There's in your slide deck, you have additional data points in the appendix. I know that was a lot.
Thank you, Superintendent, for your presentation. And I just want to be very conscious of our time, and I appreciate that you did give us a very good overview and touched upon a lot of our questions. I know that we're going to have a lot further discussion about this, as we have like 6 minutes to at least ask a few questions, but then we probably will have to hold until the next subcommittee to be able to, give us a chance to look at it, listen to the commentary that you provided today, and then come back and be prepared for our next subcommittee meeting to continue with this discussion. But I do want to thank yourself, even before we get into discussion, and Ms. Chief Penn for pulling the data sets together. I have questions on the financial side, but before I do that, I'm going to ask the members if they have any questions first, because in light of our time constraints.
Yeah, Bob White, this is a
Yes, Bob.
process question. This is, again, thank you very much, Superintendent, for putting all this together. I know there's a lot to unpack here, but what I'd like to see going forward, I'm not as up on this as Mark and others are, but I'd like to see sort of a dialogue and an expansion on action items that can help undo this. I mean, you've got some ideas about how to deal with this, but there are challenges. There's more money is certainly on the tick list and the wish list. I guess I'd like to see where to go. Otherwise, we're just generating data to kind of, generate data. So I'd like to see if, and maybe that's an OPM kind of agenda to set forth, like, what do we do with this? Where do we go? How do we help? How do we help Hartford serve the people that they need to serve? And without breaking the bank, because as the superintendent said, money that goes to special ed is being taken away from a lot of other kids in Hartford that need, a special attention, maybe not special ed, but so we got to move this forward, and it's a tough nut. I don't in any way suggest that, this is low hanging fruit.
I agree with and understand, Mr. Waxenberg, Mr. White, where you were going with that. However, I think that some of our conversations in the past where we just kept going around and around in circles, I think that it was critical that we got forward with some data set points so that we can be in a position to be able to make some decisions. So I think that we did need some data, and it was critical data, very similar to as we saw the presentation from Tom Hamilton. Now that we have some data and we have some data set, and we can look at this from there's the fiscal part of it and there's a programmatic part of it. I'm looking at it, I am Kim Kennison, from a fiscal point of it, as well as sensitive of the programmatic side of it. So I think that this gives us a little bit more education to then continue to move forward. Christine, I do see your hand up. Thank you.
Just briefly, this absolutely deserves more attention and an opportunity for us to kind of unpack what is a very impressive report. And I just want to commend the superintendent for, compiling this information. It answers a lot of questions. In my mind, I found really interesting the kind of savings, or the slide which referenced the economies of scale, where the comparison of providing services in district versus out of district and that differential. I'm not sure if, though there was information about how much the district is paying relative to what we're being charged versus what we could pay. In other words, I think that slide begins to touch on the differential, but I don't know if it fully answers the question that I think has been posed by others on the subcommittee, which relates to, is the absence of a representative at these out-of-district PPE meetings, is that absence, an indication that there's a lack of oversight? It's a blank check essentially. So I kind of really want to get, that question or those set of questions answered, because I don't think it quite gets there. I know that there was reference to how the per pupil expenditure was in line with other school districts. And I think the slide made reference to districts in Houston and, across the country, comparable districts. And I guess I'm just curious to know how the per pupil expenditure compares. I mean, that to me is the relevant set of comparisons. So these are just some of the questions, Superintendent. You don't have to answer them right now, but definitely feel that there is an opportunity to really do a deeper dive. But thank you for providing this analysis.
Thank you very much for definitely for Hartford connecting this to our requests that we had provided. In essence of time, I'm going to hold any additional commentary on this presentation and move it to our next subcommittee. And I need to ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting so we can move into our special meeting.
So moved.
Motion.
White.
Thank you, Bob. How about a second, please?
Second.
Thank you,
David Bill.
Christine. Oh, I saw Christine's hand up first. I'm sorry,
Oh.
David.
We're good.
Thank you. All in favor, please.
Aye.
Kim, before we go, just one quick thing. You have a legislative session coming up February 8th. It's a short session because it's a budget session. And as you know, this presentation by the superintendent encourages legislative action, and it is fiscal in nature. I guess I would ask Kim, along with Julian, to confer with the board, with the superintendent, because if we, as MARB, looking at our timeline, will we be too late to make any recommendations relative to legislative changes? I guess I'm concerned about the timeliness. This reeks of action. And if we are inhibited or unable to do action because of, I don't want time to be our enemy. So I would encourage you, Kim, and or the secretary, along with the vice chair, to see maybe a special meeting of the subcommittee with a special meeting of the board, just to deal with reviewing this again and coming up with concrete recommendations to bring to the finance committee of John Fonfara regarding issues dealing with open choice in a fiscal session. I'm just speaking out loud here, but you know my concern. My concern is we not lose an opportunity because of a legislative agenda. And I just don't want this to continue for another year if we can start a dialogue legislatively.
I will bring this, Julian and I will bring this definitely to the secretary's attention.
Thank you.
We were all in favor we were in the middle of the motion. All in favor of to adjourn.
Aye.
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 Aye.